Hi, everyone, and welcome back to HTV Crash Course in Jewish History. And today we finished our three-part introduction to Jewish history. Now we're going to start launching into the Jewish history itself. But before we do that, I still want to give, it's not really an introduction, but it's sort of an overview of, again, the big picture before we go into the details. I call this little presentation the 7 rules of Jewish history. And it's based on a few interesting things. Number one is, I mentioned in the introduction, Nachmanides, the great medieval Jewish scholar, commentator on the Bible, 13th century, the Ramban. In his commentary in the book of Genesis, he has a great line. He says, Maseh avot siman lebanim, the actions of the fathers are assigned to the children. We also mentioned the fact that the Bible, actually we didn't go into this in such detail, but like, what is the Bible? We're talking about the 5 books of Moses. And before we get into early Jewish history, we have to, look at where we're getting our information from. The only source of history at that time is the Bible, although the Bible is not a history book. It definitely contains historical events. It's actually prehistoric in that this is literally centuries before the first historian, Herodotus, the Greek, writes in the 5th century before the Common Era. The stories of Abraham are like 18th century BCE, Middle Bronze period, like way before. So it does contain historical references. It's not a book of Jewish law. We never learn Jewish law from the Bible. All the laws are mentioned in there somewhere, all the mitzvot, but it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Only some, fundamentalist Christian in Alabama thinks you poked out mine, I'm poking out yours. There's a whole oral law in there. It's not a book of Jewish culture. If it was, it would have the recipe for gefilte fish or cholent. The Bible primarily, although it does have cultural references, historical references, Jewish law references, but it's a book of hashkafa, Jewish worldview. It's the playbook for how things work, like the rule book for the science of our relationship with God and how the universe functions on a spiritual level and a practical level. So if we understand that point, that's number one. We want to be using that Bible as a guidebook to pull rules out early on, especially the book of Genesis, because going back to what I said about the quote from Nachmanides, the Ramban, he said, the actions of the fathers are assigned to the children. The fundamental concept is that which happens at the beginning of the story. The book of Genesis especially is going to be the revealed pattern, the playbook for everything that comes later. And if you want, like I said, if you want to understand who we are, look at Abraham. But all those stories we're going to see are the model for what will unfold afterwards. So what we're going to do is, based on the notion that the Bible is a guidebook and God chooses his words very carefully, there's nothing extraneous, nothing missing, and nothing written there for no reason. And if Abraham's a mini version of what the Jewish people are about, and the early stories in Genesis are a mini version of all of Jewish history and the rules of the game, and the first few sentences said by God to Abraham in the Bible, which is Genesis. Now let's go. I'm going to actually share screen with you guys now. Here we go. Where's our share screen? Okay, there we are. Okay, share that. Okay, let's get to here. There we go. Okay. This is Genesis chapter 12. This is Lech Lecha, third Torah portion of the book of the Bible. This is where Abraham appears for the first time. It's interesting. By the way, he appears already. He's 75 years old in the story. A good example of how the Bible is not meant to be a history book. It's missing huge chunks of the lives and of some of the major characters in the story, because I'm sure it'd be interesting to know Abraham's young life. We have midrashic stories from the rabbinic literature that fill in some of the details of Abraham's younger life. Like his father, the idol maker story, and he's smashing the idols, Terach. But where our narrative begins is what we need to know. God likes to keep it short and simple. He only focuses on that part of the narrative which is relevant. So again, we need to develop a sensitivity that when the text is speaking, it's not just giving us a story, it's giving us a pattern, a rule, something we need to know. Because, by the way, the rule of having anything in the Hebrew Bible is that it has to be authored by a prophet, whether it's the biggest guy, Moses, or a relatively small guy like Habakkuk or Nahum, one of the minor prophets. Regardless of what part of the Bible it's in, to be in the Bible, it's got to meet two criteria. A, it's got to be authored by a prophet, someone has a deeper connection to God than we have, and B, it has to have a message that is relevant to the Jewish people throughout all of human history. So putting that all together, let's jump into Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. This is the beginning of Jewish history. We fast forward through the narrative until we get to Abraham, 75 years old. He's living, originally he comes from what is Ur of the Chaldees, Ur Kasdim, which is today Iraq. He migrates up from Iraq to Haran. Haran today is in what was the modern state of Turkey, and this is where this story begins. And it says in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, and the Lord said to Abraham, Avraham, he says, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'moladecha bet avicha. Go, like leave your country, your birthplace, your father's household. Okay, and then he says to go to the land I will show you. He says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. So since we understand that Abraham is like a mini version, and the Bible is a guidebook, so now we have literally, with the broadest brushstrokes, in the first 3 sentences of what is the beginning of Jewish history, we're going to get some of the major rules of the game of what Jewish history is all about. So with this quote in mind, let's now launch into, we're going to pull each of them out of this quote more or less. So the first of our rules is, number 1, that there are rules, okay? Meaning gravity, like I always say, you know, I believe in gravity, you don't, we both jump off a building, same thing's going to happen. We have to appreciate, number 1, that these rules are there. God gives every human being free will, not just Pharaoh. He can harden his heart and ignore him, but we can all do whatever we like. We can ignore reality, but it's all still there. So that's number 1 we have to appreciate, rule number 1. Rule number 2 is these rules to apply to everyone at all times. When we talk about the Jewish people, these sentences are dealing with Abraham, but we are all children of Abraham. And he's a mini version of Jewish history, and he's a mini version of us. So these are the big rules that apply always. They're not for a specific place and time. So we see these patterns, and that's really cool, because what we'll be able to do is, at the beginning of our studies here, pull out these patterns and show that they will repeat themselves over and over again. Again, just like laws of science, which is very empowering, because, you know, we survive in the physical world because we know, even before we took physics in high school, we learned about gravity when we were little kids. You know, you drop food off the high chair, you try and stand up, you fall down, you roll off your mother's bed. We survive life because there's predictable rules that we don't have to even formally learn in school. When it comes to history, I don't know what's going to be. I have no idea. The same infinite intelligence that put laws into science, put laws into the reality and into history. So that's very empowering, by the way, which means that we have the ability collectively to make certain decisions that will push the story in certain directions. There's a clear cause and effect laid out over here, and we're going to look at that now. So these first 2 rules don't have anything to do specifically with the quotes we read from Genesis. But now we're going to pick the quote apart and show you some major patterns and rules of Jewish history. So number 1 is, or that's actually number 3, God says, go. Now, you know, Charles Dickens, the author, got paid by the word. So it was in his best interest to be wordy, verbose. God likes to keep it short. Like, he skips all of Abraham's early life. Why say go from your land, from your hometown, from your father's house? Just say leave Haran. And the point is, again, there's a deeper message here. God's telling Abraham, separate yourself. I'll use myself as an example. I'm American originally. Now I'm American Israeli, and I've lived in Israel longer than I've lived in America, but I'm an American from birth, and I grew up there. That's where I was formed. But America is a big place. I don't feel that connected to a lot of the United States. So God says, leave your land. But he says, leave your hometown, your birthplace. Like, I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in New Rochelle. That's a place I feel much closer to, and I drive there and visit. I still go back and visit. My aunt lives there. I keep my wardrobe there. When I go on speaking tours, I feel very connected to the place for decades and decades. But what's my deepest connection? It's the home. Which room in the home? The kitchen. Not just because we're Jewish and like to eat, but because smell, the olfactory sense, is the most memory-linked sense. Now go away for half a year, come back home, go into the kitchen, you smell mom's cooking, all the memories come back. But what God's telling Abraham, which means he's telling us, and this is a rule for all of history, you got to completely separate yourself. You are a nation that dwells alone and is not reckoned amongst the nations, as the prophet Bilam says in the book of Numbers. From Abraham onward, he's called Ha'ivri, which is on the other side of the river. It doesn't mean where he's living in Manhattan, everyone else is living in New Jersey. It means that Abraham, and not necessarily physically, but ideologically, in terms of our role in this history, we are going to be separate from everyone else, which is also going to explain a concept that's going to come up over and over until today, the fact that there seems to be an incredible double standard for Jews. You know, that as Hebrew National, that not quite kosher meat, they used to have that advertisement that said, Hebrew National, we have to answer to a higher authority. Hebrew Nation, we have to answer to a higher authority. You even see today, like the late great newspaper columnist I mentioned in the previous class, Charles Krauthammer, said, Jews is news. Because we are setting ourselves apart, and because we take upon ourselves not just a physical journey, but a unique spiritual, moral, historical journey to a destiny. Not talking about the destination yet, the land of Israel, but a destiny in terms of being, as we'll see later, a light to nations. We will separate ourselves. There will always be a crazy double standard. Jews versus non-Jews, this Jewish state versus the rest of the world, which is why the rest of the world is largely ignored. You know, every year the UN passes between 26 and 27 condemnations for all the human rights issues and wars in the world. Every year, 21 of those 26 or 27 are passed against Israel. It ain't fair, but this is the way it has to be. This is what we're being told at the very beginning. We are a nation that dwells alone and is not reckoned amongst the nations. The double standard the world uses isn't fair, and it's incredibly hypocritical, but this is the way it has to be if that rule is correct and what I'm telling you is right. So we see rule number 3. Okay, let's look at number 4. God says, what does he say next? He says, go, separate yourself. He doesn't just, like in the Exodus narrative, take the Jews out of Egypt, give them a plane ticket and say, go wherever you like. We're given a specific geographic destination to go to and a destiny to go to, which is the land of Israel, which in Abraham's time is not called Israel, it's called Canaan. And remember, he's a stranger in a strange land. He is a sojourner in the land that will eventually be his descendants. But this is important to understand also because Judaism, you know, we say is God, Torah, and the land of Israel. And that's our relationship with those 3 things are the makeup of what a Jewish person is about. The land of Israel is not a random piece of real estate that's picked. It is a specific piece of real estate picked for a specific function. I'm also a tour guide, and I always explain it, this way, I learned this, by the way, the hard way, traveling around the world. I used to bring my laptop. I used to bring a projector for my PowerPoints. And I noticed that every country has a different wall outlet. If you don't have the right plug, like the one in South Africa is huge, England, whoa, the right plug and the right voltage, your appliance ain't going to work. It's going to blow up or it's just not going to work. We are a very specific plug, the Jewish people. And there's only one outlet that we will be able to plug into, which is the land of Israel, which means the only place that we as a nation, individually and collectively, will be ultimately capable of achieving our unique mission in history, which we'll talk about later, is going to be the land of Israel. What does that mean practically for us? That means, and boy, can we test this now. Remember, if you've seen the introduction, we're like 220 years left from the 6,000 years from this narrative. We've run a lot of these rules through the testing ground of history. And we can see this is for sure true. This means practically that since our destiny and our destination has to always be Israel, we will never be allowed to remain long-term in any place outside the land of Israel. We will be bounced from place to place until we end up back in our homeland, which is where almost half the Jews in the world are now. That's pretty unbelievable. And by the way, that also brings up another unique pattern, because the greatest danger for us in the diaspora will be that we get too comfortable somewhere and we assimilate there, which brings us to another pattern which you can attest over and over again that the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism, we'll also get to that in a few minutes, have happened in places where Jews are most like and most comfortable amongst the non-Jews. Because that's the place where most danger of forgetting that we have only one place we could be. What do you learn from that practically? And I say this all the time. Buy real estate in Israel now. Even if you're not ready to come live, get a piece of real estate anywhere. Get a closet apartment in Beersheba, because Mashiach could come at any moment. And like I said before, you're going to be stuck in that tent camp on the Egyptian border with all those diaspora Jews who didn't get back in time. And the people who were smart and got there early will have all the good apartments. Okay, so now we understand that point. So let's keep going. So, unique destiny and unique destination. The only place we can actualize our potential. Then what does God say? He says, I will make you into a nation. Now, because God says, I will be actively involved in your history, things are going to happen to us that just aren't going to happen to anyone else. Jewish history, for better and for worse, defies all the laws of human history. There's an idea, by the way, a spiritual idea, that all the nations of the world, the original 70 nations, had like a guardian angel who sort of deals with them, like an intermediate between God and the nation. Because like the CEO of a company generally is not dealing with what's going down on the production floor of the factory. There's layers of management. That's how it generally works. But with us, the Jewish people, we have this idea that there's no intermediaries. For better or for worse, God is always on our case, sort of like sitting in a giant room with cubicles, everyone working, and the CEO of the company is sitting up a little higher with a big plate glass window looking out on everyone. And we are the guy sitting right in front of his window with our back to him so he can see our computer monitor whenever he looks up. God's eyes are always on the land of Israel and always on the Jewish people. But because God is directly involved in our history, things will happen to us in our history that will just not happen to anyone else. Which is why we always like to quote that story when Blaise Pascal, the French Enlightenment philosopher from the 17th century, this is the age of reason, is asked by Louis XIV, the King of France. This is reason, logical world now. 17th century, he says, please show me proof of the supernatural. And Pascal answers Louis XIV, he says, the Jewish people, your majesty. And if you read what Pascal writes, he says, the survival of the Jewish people, I have so many quotes to talk about this. The survival of the Jewish people is, I have Bishop Thomas Newton, the Bishop of Bristol in the 18th century. He says the preservation of the Jew is the single greatest act of God's providence. It's the greatest proof that there's a God in the world. The Jewish people are still here. And by the way, it's not only good stuff, it's often some really bad stuff. But for better or for worse, everything about Jewish history is supernatural, which is probably why David Ben-Gurion said so beautifully. And he was not a religious guy, but he knew his Bible and he knew his history. He had like 6,500 books in his own personal library. He said, to be a realist as a Jew, you have to believe in miracles. That's Jewish history. Everything about it is supernatural. Okay, what else can we throw into there? Number 6. So God says, and I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. By the way, that's an important sentence because, the group of people in this world who most supports the Jewish people in Israel specifically are evangelical Christians. And I have to clear the air here. A lot of people incorrectly think that it's because they want all the Jews to come back to Israel and the Messiah will come and it'll be Jesus and they'll all convert. I mean, there's definitely Christians who want that for sure. But the number one reason why these evangelical pro-Israel Christians are supporting Israel is precisely because of these quotes right here, that I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. They take the Bible very seriously. They believe God is good to those who are good to the Jews. They also see the return of the Jews from exile, the rebirth of Israel, the reunification of Jerusalem as fulfillment of biblical prophecy. But they want to be on our side because they believe that they're going to be rewarded accordingly or punished if they're not. But this point is an amazing point because what we're talking about here is the crazy roller coaster relationship that we have historically with the non-Jewish world. You can literally chart the rise and fall of civilizations and empires by how they treat the Jewish people. If you go to my website, it's hard to show, I should have put the image up here. If you go to my website, I have a t-shirt I sell, which says, civilizations, nations, and empires that have tried to destroy the Jewish people and their status today. And it says ancient Egypt, gone. Philistines, gone. Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman empires, gone, 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 gone. Crusaders, gone. Spanish Empire, gone. Nazi Germany, gone. Soviet Union, gone. Iran with 3 question marks. Then it says the Jewish people, the smallest of nations, but with a friend in the highest of places. So be nice. It's funny, by the way, a lot of Jews are afraid to wear their shirt. Like, I can't wear it, don't kill me. I said, who? A Babylonian? He's gone. Just don't wear it in Iran, you're fine. Ironically, who buys and wears all the shirts are those evangelical Christians. I get emails from them and Facebook posts and Instagram. Rabbi Spiro, I live in Yazoo, Mississippi, and I'm wearing your t-shirt because God loves the Jewish people. But you can literally chart the rise and fall of nations and empires by how they treat us. And by the way, sometimes the nations, like we saw before, that treat us the best end up treating us the worst. Like in places like whether it's ancient Egypt or Poland before the Khmelnytsky massacres or Germany before the Holocaust. Again, because we can't be allowed to assimilate. That is not normal, by the way. We should be allowed to assimilate. You become like the majority till they stop hating you and you disappear amongst them. But this is unbelievable. You can charting the rise and fall of civilizations and empires. They pull us towards, they push us away. There's, I know my family, my name is Spiro, my family tradition is, and that name Spiro comes from Speyer in Germany. They have Bishop Lustiger, Holstig Lustiger of Speyer 1,000 years ago writes, wishing to make Speyer into a city, I invited in the Jews. You think a bishop in medieval Europe wanted Jews in his town? No way. But as we'll see in a minute, Jews are such a dynamic force for change on every level, economically and intellectually, and you name it, in trade, you name it. And having a few hundred Jews in your town in medieval Europe would totally change the economy. The town could grow into a city. You could build a cathedral. Yet you fast forward hundreds of years later to the time of the Renaissance, and in Speyer, they're expelling the Jews out and inviting them back in twice in the same century. In the city of Mainz, also on the Rhine, I think it happens 5 times in the same century. Like by the second time, the Jews are saying, you know what? If we come back, we're not buying real estate. We're going to live out of our suitcases and rent. But why would they pull us in and push us away? Pull us in and push us away. Because they can't live with us. They can't live without us. We come in, we're successful, whatever. It's good. Then they end up hating us. They throw us out. And boom, what happens? Everything collapses. And then they have to invite us back in again. Pull us in, push us out. Again, the lesson we should do, go back to number 4, is realize the place we should be, if we can be, is Israel. Pretty cool. And so they can't live with us. They can't live without us. And the 7th of our 7 rules, God says, right? He says, I'll bless us who bless you and curse us who curse you. Through you, all the nations or communities of the earth shall be blessed. This is the whole idea of this light to nations idea. And I always say, what does that mean to be a light to nations? Besides obvious great Jewish contributions to the world like gilt bagels, junk bonds, leverage buyouts, Einstein, Marx, Freud, 23% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1901, 24% of the Fields Medals in mathematics, 25% of the Forbes list of the wealthiest people on the planet Earth. What is the light that we are supposed to be to nations? And that goes back to Abraham and his original mission. We're the God Squad. Our job has been to go from a family to a nation, plug into a specific piece of real estate, and create a nation that's a light to nations, to live and act in a way that inspires other people. And in fact, that we have seen, and this is the first book I wrote, World Perfect, this is exactly how it works. And sometimes it's not even consciously, and sometimes very indirectly. But directly or indirectly, we, the teeny tiny Jewish people who shouldn't even be here, have completely changed the world on the deepest level in terms of our understanding of reality, the idea we're supposed to be bringing to the world, which we talked about in that first class of the introduction, is one God and one absolute standard of morality. And you see like John Adams saying, I will insist the Hebrews, second president of the United States, I will insist the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. He says, and he talks about the idea of one God, which he says, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and therefore of all civilization. This is coming from, second president of the United States in the 18th century. But this is exactly the power of the Jewish people. The idea of one God and one absolute standard of morality has totally transformed the world. That is the light we're supposed to be. So if we put this all together, we see with the broadest brushstrokes, this is the playbook of all of Jewish history, and these rules will continue to play out throughout all of Jewish history. And just to review them one more minute, right, that there are rules to the game, that Judaism, with the idea of one God who acts in history, introduced a unique idea of determinism, of a caring, loving being. Like I said in the introduction, that history is a controlled process leading to a destination. We can ignore the rules, but they're there. And these always apply. Like the laws of gravity apply everywhere on the planet Earth in any century you look at. They apply at all times to every one of us. But we are a unique nation that is never supposed to be like anyone else, that the world will always judge differently, even unfairly, but that's the way it's supposed to be. That as a unique nation, we have only one piece of real estate where we can actualize our unique national mission. That is the land of Israel. Okay, we're going to have a history, for better or for worse, that is going to defy all the laws of human history, that things will happen to us that just don't happen to anyone else in the world. That we're going to have a crazy, tumultuous roller coaster ride with the world around us, where they pull us towards, they push us away. But boy, is it extremes from one extreme to the other. And finally, despite the fact that we shouldn't even be here, and as we'll see, we'll be often the most hated, despised people on the planet Earth, with no empire and no ability to physically force our worldviews on anyone like the Greeks or the Romans did, we will transform the collective consciousness of the human race in ways that very few people appreciate how much of the world thinks with Jewish software as their basic software operating package. So with that introduction in mind, and hopefully these rules playing in the back of our heads, we can now start going further into our Jewish history, and we can test these patterns like gravity to see that these playbook rules will reverberate throughout time. That's it for the class, guys. You're always welcome to visit my website, kenspiro.com. I got tons of content online. You can listen, read, and watch for free. You're welcome to follow us on HTV. Like, of course, and send comments, and we'll see you at the next class. Enjoy the other classes and have a great day.